Maybe they found it here, Sunderland. Chance here for Lyndon Gooch.
Hello and welcome back to the What the Falk Sunderland Preview Podcast. Sunderland have already secured one trophy, and whether they stand a solid chance at securing another one come season end will probably have an awful lot to do with this weekend's game against Lincoln City. A 2-0 win over Accrington moved us into third, above Lincoln, this weekend's opponents, and with both sides going for automatic promotion, Saturday's game at the Stadium Light is probably the first real promotion six-pointer of the season. And to discuss Saturday's game is digital sports editor for The Times and The Sunday Times, and of course, massive Lincoln City fan, Tom Clarke. How are you doing, Tom? Are you all right?
Not too bad, Greg. Thank you very much for having me. Nice to be here. I'm guessing you're probably in a slightly better mood than I am after the midweek results.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Not doing too bad considering we're just speaking in the aftermath of another Sunderland win. But I think first things first, obviously everyone at Sunderland's incredibly happy, as you've touched on yourself, probably not the other way around. I think it's a massive game on Saturday for both teams, but you're going to arrive at the Stadium Light in really rocky form. Rochdale and Gillingham, 2 home defeats. There's defeats to Plymouth, draws against Ipswich, Swindon. It's not been great considering how good you have been up to that point, but what's gone wrong recently?
I think injuries is the first thing that we have to alight on. I found it difficult to watch the last 2 games in particular because they were those games that all football fans hate, when you feel like you're watching a game and you know how the opposition are going to play, particularly with Gillingham. Any team that's played against Steve Evans, Gillingham this season, you know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
You're going to get a battle, you're going to get screaming from the sidelines, you're going to get trying to buy free kicks, conning the referee, and you're going to get balls into the box for John Akinde and Vadane Oliver. And it was one of those games where, as a fan, we all have it. You're watching going, come on, surely you know what's coming. You know what's happening. And yet we still allowed it to happen. So there's a bit of naivety going on. But as I say, injuries, Jorge Grant, our player of the season, he had that in the bag basically by Christmas. He got injured in the defeat against Plymouth. And there was the feeling in that game, we lost 4-3 in the last minute. And that was obviously a bad result. But the feeling of him being injured was such a massive point for us. Liam Bridgut, our captain, has also been missing for quite a lot of games, and we've got such a young side that I think when you lose just 1 or 2 players, it can have a massive detrimental effect. And I'm interested as well, watching Sunderland of late. One of the things that Johnson's been able to do is bring in some of the more experienced players, bring them back into the fold. And I think when I watched you beat us in the trophy semi-final, that was the most apparent thing between the 2 teams. I didn't think it was a great game. And it obviously came down to penalties, but ultimately I think it was experience that told, both in the penalty shootout and during the game. So I think injuries to some key players is really biting in these moments when you need a bit of game management against teams like Gillingham and against teams like Rochdale that are going to scrap. So missing those players has led to a bit of naivety, and we're paying the price at the minute, because the other thing I fear, and this can be slightly fearful for Saturday, is that I think teams have worked out how to beat us, how to get at us, which can be a bit of a concern. So it is, as you say, it's a huge game for both teams. But Sunderland are massive favourites, Graham. You've got to say, huge favourites now going into Saturday's game.
I don't know whether Sunderland are ever favourites in anything, but I suppose if you were a betting man, yes, I suppose. But then I suppose I'm on a recorded podcast, so I better not say that, just in case that one comes back to bite me in the arse. But I'm sure I looked at this, and I mean, I've never been good at maths, to be honest, but I'm pretty certain the average age of your squad with everyone fit is only about 23, 24, give or take. And you touched on it there, one of your more experienced players, Liam Bridcut's been out for, well, he's been injured pretty much all season sporadically, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. It's funny because I had not reservations about him in the team, but when you've got such a young team and so full of pace, someone like him, and he plays in this defensive midfield role, he can often slow the game down a little bit. And to a fan, sometimes you're going, come on, attack. Why are you stopping? Why are you slowing us down? But that's That's why he's a professional footballer and I'm not. But it's that kind of game management that sometimes you do need that we're now seeing that we've been lacking of late. The other thing to say is that Joe Walsh, one of our centre backs, who joined us from MK Dons in the summer, he's also been injured, and he's been a huge loss. He's one of those classic unsung heroes, one of those players that you don't realise how important he is until he's not there. Just does the simple things very, very well. He's a left-sided centre back, which in the modern game, when you're trying to play out from the back like Lincoln do, you want that left foot, right foot combination in the centre of your defence. He's been a big miss for us as well. And as you say, average age, we often have, the captain of our team will be either Tom Hopper, one of our strikers, Adam Jackson, Walsh, or Jorge Grant. If Bridcut's not playing, it's one of those four, and they're all mid-20s. And so that's what you're looking at in terms of they're your most experienced players. Tom Hopper is our striker, former Leicester Academy, been around about at Southend and things before joining us. And that really makes you realise when he's leading us out, and this is no detriment to Tom Hopper, but in terms of his experience within the game, in League One, it's a tough league. You come up against some proper competitors and some players that have really been round the block. And when you think that he's the leading light and he's the captain, he's the experience point, you realise what a young squad it is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good young players coming through, but what you sometimes get with younger players is inconsistencies because of learning the game, basically. And last time we played Lincoln, obviously was great for us, but the preview show beforehand was with Lincoln chairman Clive Nates, and he basically said, like, look, I think we're a bit ahead of schedule here. Like, we didn't really plan on being top two, but it is what it is. And he really sort of talked it down, the hopes of automatic promotion. But whilst many didn't really expect it, you're still up and around there. And obviously you've dropped to fourth, I think it is, after our win and your defeat yesterday. But the form throughout the season still gives you a really strong chance of some sort of promotion, be it automatic or playoffs. So if you missed out on promotion, would it be seen as a failure within the fan base, or do you still think it's a damn good season even if you just miss out?
Oh, that's a tough question. I think there would probably be some fans who would see it as a failure just because of the opportunity that I think was there. It's funny, I was listening to the show with Clive today before coming on to try and make sure that I offered as much insight as the club chairman can possibly give.
You've got to have a nice South African accent to go with it, mine. So that's a tough one to compete with, to be honest.
Exactly. From South Africa to Salford, it won't quite be the same. But, no, it was interesting hearing him, and obviously a lot of the narrative around us at the start of the season was that we're ahead of schedule. Michael Appleton said it as well. We're ahead of schedule. This is a year, we're at least a year ahead. He's just signed a new contract. So there is the feeling amongst perhaps some of the more realistic fans like myself and my dad, who remember the days scrapping away in League Two and, the Keith Alexander era of getting to the playoffs and just missing out. That was my teenage era of when that was success, getting to the playoffs year after year and ultimately failing. That was about as good as it had ever got until the Cowley brothers came in and brought us up to the position we're in now. And obviously, within that smaller narrative of the recent years and all the success, to now be in contention at the top of League One, I think some fans will see it as a failure if we drop down. I must admit, I think if we didn't get the playoffs, I think even a pragmatist like myself would say that would be disappointing, because having watched all the teams, we all do it, don't we? Particularly in this season, if you've been brave in I Follow this season and been much else to do, we've all watched a lot of football actually, and we've seen a lot of teams. Yeah, and I find myself thinking that whilst we're in poor form, and obviously playing yourselves on Saturday, that's going to be a real tough test. But I think we're good enough, and I think we deserve at least a playoff spot. So I would say that if we make the playoffs and then ultimately don't go up, I wouldn't say that's failure. But if we were to continue to drop as we are looking like we might do out of the playoff picture, I think from the position we've been in, with the squad that we've got, with some of the very talented young players that we've been able to get in as well, I think that would be disappointing, certainly. Yeah,
it's a funny one, isn't it? Because if you say had a standard season and finished seventh, it would probably be seen as that really good season. Yeah. However, because you've been like top and second for almost the entirety of the season, if things drop now where you went seventh. But I suppose there's an interesting sort of subplot here as well with Lincoln coming out of form a little bit, which is famous last words before you beat us on Saturday, of course. Portsmouth currently in seventh, just employing the Cowleys. Does that concern you a little bit?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I was looking at this the other day, and I think someone mentioned it on Twitter. How often is it that you go on talk about football these days and say, "I saw something on Twitter"? But people were talking about managerial changes through the season, and obviously Sunderland have changed manager. Portsmouth are about to change manager. Doncaster, not through any fault of their own, ended up changing manager. So this team
change that one.
Ipswich are changing manager. So it does make you think as a club that, and don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely delighted and I hope Michael Appleton stays for a very, very long time. But it's funny, isn't it, as you say, and I think you're alluding to it there, about momentum. We obviously had that early season momentum, carried us to the top of the league with a lot of that kind of youthful exuberance and teams not expecting maybe Lincoln to blow them away with pace and counter-attacking and playing it out from the back. And I think we had that for quite a while. Particularly away from home. We had a great record away from home with teams perhaps not expecting us to play the way that we did. And maybe that injuries and things are just catching up with us a little bit. And so some of these other teams are getting momentum at different periods. You guys are on an unbelievable run. You wonder whether Ipswich might put together a little run. And as you say, maybe Portsmouth, if the Cowleys are confirmed as the new managers, there's been talk that I've seen about Portsmouth fans being worried about the style of play and things like that. But the Cowleys guarantee hard work, and I think they get success at Portsmouth. And also, I would say in their defence that the kind of negative football tag that they have, it frustrated me a little bit as a Lincoln manager when you'd have that moment that we all get as fans in the Football League where you get your shot on Sky Sports once every 6 months or whatever, and the pundits who've seen you a couple of times trot on and go, well, this is how Lincoln play at all. What are you on about? And they're like, well, the Cowleys, they like to put it forward. And yeah, they did. And sometimes, as I said, this season with our game management, I've often found myself thinking, bloody hell, I'd love the Cowleys to be in there just to kill 10 minutes because they were excellent at that. The game management was fantastic. But they did also try and play. And as watching them at Huddersfield after they left us in a professional capacity, of course, with work, I noticed that they had tried to, evolve the style a little bit. So I think they'll bring success is the bottom line. And I think you're right to suggest that perhaps a change in manager might bring a new momentum to Portsmouth and only adds another challenger for that top 6 spot. But I'd be interested have you found that with Sunderland? Does it feel like unstoppable momentum, or is it changes that the manager has made that are evident on the pitch?
I think the big one for me, it was a funny one because we had a sticky patch, which people listening will remember. And we beat Lincoln 4-0. Brilliant. Fantastic. Yeah. Out of nowhere after getting beat off Wigan at home the week beforehand. And then we had a COVID situation, which just knocked our players out basically for like 3 or 4 weeks over Christmas. And then we came back and it was like win 1, lose 1, draw 1, win 1, lose 1, draw 1. And then we beat Doncaster. And then we're now just the best team that ever existed for some reason. But I think I'd be remiss to say that bringing Aiden McGeady back into the side, and I've been getting a lot of heat for this on Twitter this week, but I think he is the best player that League One has ever seen. But he's...
I think you're right. I actually saw you discussing that earlier, and well, it's a funny thing, isn't it? We discuss it at work quite a lot, and there's no such thing as just a nice, honest opinion in football these days, is there? No. You can't just present a nice opinion, and someone can go, interesting, but I don't agree with you. You're either an idiot or you're spot on. That's it. There's the only 2 options in football these days. But I would say if I had to pick one of those 2 extreme camps, I'd say that you're right. When I've seen McGeady play, you can just tell by everything. I remember in leagues below as a kid and going with my dad, and you'd get the odd player that would come towards the end of their career having, dripped down the leagues. And my dad would always say, just watch his touch. Just watch his first touch. And I mean, when you see McGeady on the ball, controlling the ball, he's on a different level to everyone else. And I found that interesting watching us play against you. We've obviously got players like Morgan Rogers on loan from Manchester City, Brennan Johnson on loan from Nottingham Forest, both incredibly highly rated. But watching them and then watching McGeady knows exactly what he's doing with the ball every single time. And sometimes they do, sometimes it's instinct, sometimes it can be absolutely brilliant, but sometimes it can lead to a step over and then fall over or hit the corner flag or whatever.
Yeah.
And obviously that can happen with McGeady as well, but he knows, you can tell he knows, he's got it all mapped out in his head.
There's just something about him being back on the side it's really, really helped us. There's a lot of other good stuff that, I could touch on as well, I suppose, but it felt like probably the ownership change has been quite a big thing as well, which I suppose is why I was going to ask regarding the fan base and how Lincoln's fan base are feeling, but I feel like from what I've seen on Twitter, just to go by what you were saying before, it seems like Lincoln fans are concerned over what's happened. They are worried over what's happened, but they seem to have a lot of faith in Appleton and a lot of faith in Clive Nates as it is. So you feel like even if maybe, the end of the season is a bit of a damp squib and you maybe have to end up going to the playoffs, which no one likes being in, you're in good hands. Is that a good way to assess the Lincoln fan base?
Absolutely. I mean, as I say, as football fans, we always get carried away, don't we, and lost in the moment at times. Particularly when you're in the Football League, you have to place your current situation and current status within the context of your recent past or in your time as a supporter. And in my time as a supporter, this is the best position we've been in terms of the ownership status within the Football League. But also, we've got this exciting thing now, and this perhaps leans more to my position as a journalist. A lot of the time within work, we're looking at football clubs that have got a plan, not just on the pitch, but you can tell there's an overall cohesive plan. And that's interesting, you talking about a change in ownership as well at the same time as a managerial change has happened. That's so important. And people talk about it and pontificate on Match of the Day about it at Premier League level. It's important all the way through the Football League. If you have a club with a cohesive vision from the boardroom to the dugout onto the pitch, everyone's in tune, that can make a huge difference. And it means that when the tough times come, when you have a dip in form or maybe you don't quite achieve what you set out to or you were hoping to, there's no big panic, there's no big dramatic change. Maybe you have to move some players on, maybe some players get offers that are better than you can do. That's a reality of the position we're in. But it's fine. And that's, as you say, there's very much a trust in what's happening. And why wouldn't there be? I mean, there's only been overall success. I think to have had the success we did under the Cowleys, to then lose them, and to then bring in a manager like Appleton, who in a year has completely changed the squad, the dynamic of the squad, the way we play, and made it broadly successful, and done that with the backing and with the work of the board. It's such a lovely thing to see as a fan when you see all these stories. You guys have had difficulties. So many other clubs have had friction, takeovers failing. It's throughout the football. We see it all the time, don't we? So we're very lucky with what we've got, and it's definitely a trust there, definitely.
Absolutely, and I think Brentford are probably the poster boys of having a vision and knowing what you're doing and recovering from whoever you lose. Like they lose a big player or two big players every year, yet they're still there or thereabouts, going for the championship, the promotion to the Premiership, and I'm sure they'll get there at one point, and they'll probably get there with a lot of money in the bank from sales of players. It can sometimes feel boring if your club is like you make players good and then you sell them on, but unless you're pretty much top four, unfortunately, it's kind of the way of the beast at the moment. Like Jordan Henderson for us, great to be able to make him. Same with Jordan Pickford, but sometimes they have to go elsewhere, and I think the idea of having a plan and the idea of having, like, obviously with Kyril at Sunderland, that seems to be in place with Lee Johnson being a big part of it. And the fact that the form and the mood around the club has changed is probably not a huge surprise. Again, as I say before, we inevitably get beat on Saturday, and this gets played back to me. talking about Michael Appleton and him being on the TV on Sunday for our Wembley game, found that quite odd. How was it for a Lincoln fan? I found it weird that obviously we beat you in the semi, we had you the week later, and they had him on as the pundit. It just seemed like a really odd choice. Is that just me?
It's interesting. I don't find it odd, but that's perhaps because working in the media, I kind of see the other side of it, which a lot, these days, part of being a manager is your presentation to the outside world.
Absolutely.
Back in the day, 20 years ago, managers would chat to journalists, over a drink maybe, and it would be far more informal. But the way you present yourself to the footballing world is a massive part of your status within the game. And for example, the Cowleys, Danny Cowley in particular, is very, very good at that. He's got a good relationship with the media. He's always very open to talking to people, and he's very good at being a pundit when he's been out of work in the recent months. And as a football fan, maybe as a Portsmouth fan, you've been watching him and going, "Oh yeah, he's quite interesting. He quite knows what he's talking about. He's made some interesting points." And feeds into the psyche. So I'm not trying to say that Michael Appleton's on there to make sure that if he gets sacked, he's going to get another job. But it's part of you've got to do it, I think, as a manager these days. So maybe a bit close to the action in terms of being sandwiched between two games against you guys. But I wasn't that surprised to see him there. Because it's just part of the game now these days, I think, and wise managers do it well.
Yeah, maybe. One of the things that stuck out to me was he was chatting about how I think we had like 7 players out injured or something like that. I'll be honest, I was far too well oiled to pick up his exact quote. I've got 2 weeks off work, so I was all right. And he said he would love to be able to name a bench of like 7 players, something along that line, where basically he was alluding to the fact that maybe we have a little bit of an abundance of riches. But he also touched on, I think, a couple of weeks previous about Jorge Grant. We've already spoke about him. He said he doesn't expect him to play the season, or he'd be very surprised. I know that's changed recently. But just how big of a blow is losing Jorge Grant, because it seems that that's kind of, as you touched on before, coincided with his injury. Your form dip. Is one player that important to Lincoln?
I didn't think he was until he wasn't there. I thought he was a very talented player, and he's a really interesting player as well, because he was signed by the Cowleys as someone who'd been in Nottingham Forest's academy, one of these kind of classic young players, clearly very talented. I think he'd scored a goal for Forest in an FA Cup game, perhaps against Tottenham, and kind of announced himself. So very, very popular and very successful academy. But then he'd been around lower league football in League Two on loan spells and things. And he was signed, and he started off playing as a winger. And he was one of these players that on the wing, he was maybe doing things with the ball that you didn't always, again, slowing the play down and things. And he came in, and then Michael Appleton came in. And towards the end of the season, before coronavirus struck and we were struggling, we started to see him playing in a central midfield role. And it was really interesting to watch. He just changed completely as a player. He suddenly, from being that kind of wide man who wants to cut in from the left wing onto his right foot and being a bit frustrating with his delivery, he suddenly was the guy that was dictating everything. And so this season, it then went on from being one of a midfield 2 to being very much almost that kind of quarterback role sometimes, particularly when Liam Bridcut's not playing, dropping deep, but just dictating the entire play. And if we see it in football all the time these days, if you're going to play the style which we play, which is possession-based, wanting to play out from the back, and you have players like Brendan Johnson and Morgan Rogers with pace who want to get in those little pockets near the opposition goal, that whole system falls down if you don't have a player in that defensive midfield role who can pick passes, who can, turn, bring in a player. I think the best example, if your listeners want to see how good Jorge Grant was, the highlights from our win against Wigan, which was a really tough game, actually. Wigan have shown an upturn in form. And it was 1-1. And there was ball played out, and it was played into Jorge Grant in the middle. And it was kind of a little bit what I was alluding to before with Aiden McGeady, where he saw something and knew something that was about to happen in his head that no one else knew. and he plays this kind of spinning reverse pass, which cuts through Wigan and sends Tom Hopper clean through, takes a touch and scores. And it's just a brilliant team splitting pass. And he does that a lot. He takes touches in uncomfortable areas which other players can't take and turns out of them and keeps the ball. He's just such a vital cog in the very middle of the Lincoln City Appleton machine. So that's why we've struggled massively without him, and it'd be a big miss for as many games as he's out between now and the end of the season, definitely.
Yeah, I think there was rumours that he would potentially be back end of the season, which, if it does end up being playoffs, I suppose it plays into your hands. But I believe that your playoff run, as you sort of alluded to before, was as bad as ours. Neither of us win playoff games, do we? So I don't think either of us want that.
It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. I mean, you guys have got to be, pushing and up to third now. With the momentum you're on, it's got to be have that second spot in mind. You can let Hull have the title. It does come back to it, doesn't it? With momentum at this stage. Alex Ferguson used to say it, didn't he? He wanted his teams to peak in the March period. If you guys are on this run now, I know. Even I'm trying to set you up to lose now on the weekend. And it does seem to be going that way, and you're the only team, I think, from a Lincoln point of view. As you say, when you're in a moment where you're dropping points, you often end up looking at the other teams, don't you? And you look at the table and you lose like we did the other night, and then you immediately go in the latest table and go, right, what everyone else done? What's it looking like now? Right, okay. You're the only team that in the last few weeks I've looked at and thought they're not going to drop any points. And I thought that tonight, you guys had Accrington. It's tough. That is a tough game.
Horrible ground, horrible pitch, horrible team to play against.
Don't make it easy. Really get in your. I mean, they're another team who took points off us lately, conceded a late goal, a 2-2 draw, and that was it was one of those where as a 2-2 draw you're like, okay, yeah, fair enough. It's disappointing to concede a late goal, but it was one of those where equally if we'd won it, you'd have been going, wow, that is a massive win, because they really turned up, got in our face, tried to zip it about as well, tried to play. I think John Coleman and Accrington sometimes, because they make it so difficult for you and because it can be ugly, I think they get a little bit of a bad rep in terms of they can pass it around when they want to. So that was, but again, I wasn't surprised to see you guys win against them, and that probably says a lot. I think that football fans are looking at Sunderland now and going, I think they'll probably win.
Feels like we're finding ways to win even when it's not that pretty, i.e. tonight, Sunday against Tranmere necessarily wasn't a great performance, but clean sheet and we win. But it wasn't always that way. Obviously, the last time we played Lincoln in the league anyway was we weren't in great form. Yeah, we had a new manager, but we just got beat off Wigan, who at the time were rock bottom and showing zero form whatsoever with their one shot on target, which was the most Sunderland thing ever. But then we went to Lincoln and we were 3-0 up at half time and we ended up winning 4-0. And it was, looking back, we've done it a couple of times since, but at that point, it was just the most bizarre result. And the way that it came across was just like Lee Johnson had flicked a switch and that was it. But equally, it was a shock for Lincoln because you were banging form. But then you came up for the semi-final, the Papa John's game. It wasn't the greatest of games. I think you had the better. I think it was even first half. You had probably the better of the first 20 minutes of the second half, and I think we maybe once you scored played really well. Weirdly, after that, and then the penalties is what it is. But why do you think Lincoln, despite having such a good season, have essentially been unable to beat us this season?
I think. Well, I'd come back to some of the points I raised earlier about experience and game management. I think the 4-0 was obviously a bit of a freak in some senses, because I think it was one of those strange ones where you did very well and took your chances early on. And I think there were a few moments, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was a kind of tight penalty call that we could have had. We've had a lot of penalties this season. Through one-on-one as well and missed early on.
I think it was Brennan Johnson had two chances going clean through on goal where our defence just disappeared, and I think he put it wide twice, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So it's one of those where I found myself reflecting after the game and talking with my dad and saying, well, it wasn't a terrible performance. It wasn't awful. Sunderland very good and deserved to win. But I think the thing that worries me about Saturday from a Lincoln point of view is more the trophy semi-final. Because it was again that frustrating thing that I talked about with the Gillingham and Rochdale games, whereas as a fan, you were just desperate for a bit of experience and a bit of game management, maybe buying a few free kicks, killing a bit of time, someone pretending they've pulled a hamstring when they haven't, all this horrible stuff that you hate as an opposition fan, but you've got to do it. You've got to do it at this level to kill off momentum. And there was a period of about 5 minutes before you scored where you'll be able to correct me, but I think you came down your right wing several times and put balls into the box. And Charlie White had 2 headers, I think. One he headed into the ground and over the bar. One he headed and made our keeper make a save. And watching it, and you're going, don't let them do that again. Do not let them do that again. This guy is bang in form and he's great in the air. Don't let them cross it again. Oh, you've let them cross it again. Brilliant. And now he's scored. Yeah. So it's that kind of thing where a bit of experience, a Liam Bridcut or someone, or as I say, under the Cowleys, there would have been a bit of, right, we need to, you go down, pretend you've pulled a hamstring. We need 5 minutes here just to kill this off because they're coming over and over again. And we kept giving you the ball back. And so that's what worries me about Saturday, is that we're on a bit of a low ebb at the minute. You guys are on a great run, but also you've got that winning feeling, that way of winning, and you've got the experienced players, and we just look a little bit lacking in those areas at the minute. So yeah, I think that's where the 4-0 was a strange game, but I think the trophy game told me more about the two teams, I think, in terms of those tight moments. And I think we'll make it difficult for you. I hope we will. But I just have a slight worry with particularly how we've dealt with aerial balls lately. Lewis Monsma, one of our defenders, had a superb start to the season, was one of our top scorers at one point.
8 goals or something before December, wasn't it?
Shown great ability bringing the ball out from the back. And then he got hit by COVID and a few injuries and stuff. And since he's come back, he's just looked not quite as sharp. And a few opposition strikers have, to use that horrible cliche, just got up and around him, and he doesn't seem to fancy it. And so yeah, going up against Charlie White, I'm not quite sure how he'll fare, but it'll be an interesting one because it's those two. As much as it's potentially a contrast in form as well, it's that contrast between game management and experience that I think could be the most telling thing on Saturday, because you guys have got both of those things in abundance at the minute, as well as the form, and we are out of form, and hopefully Liam Bridcut can play to bring some experience, but without him we're a bit naive at times, and I think a team in form like Sunderland will know how to pick us off.
Could it help taking the pressure off a little bit? Because I imagine because of the form that you've had, has put you probably favourites for, like, I didn't expect you to lose against Rochdale. I didn't expect you to lose against Gillingham. I would have probably put you as favourites. And as you sort of touched before, truth be told, we are the favourites. I know that home games and away games don't really count in a COVID world, if we're completely honest, such as the statistics and stuff like that. But the fact that you're not favourites coming into the game on Saturday, do you think that could benefit? Could that take a bit of pressure off younger lads? Because younger players sometimes do feel a bit more pressure, I suppose.
Yeah, that's the only kind of silver lining of when you've had a poor run like this, and you look at the table and you think, well, there is 10 or 12 games still left. There's still time for us to flip that run on its head and put a little run together towards the end. And maybe, as you say, with young players as well, confidence is key. So if Michael Appleton can have worked with them in training this week, maybe made us a bit more solid, a bit more streetwise. If we can stay in the game early on, because we've been terrible at conceding early goals, if we can stay in the game early on, then maybe we'll start to think, hey, we're not crap, we're not rubbish, we can do this. And maybe a bit of that pressure might go on to you guys, and the pressure will come off us a little bit. I think you're right, that could help. But my but for that, and you can tell, I'm sure every answer is coming with that all goes out the window if we concede an early goal, which we have been doing of late. And I'm sure Lee Johnson's going to have you prepped to attack us in all the ways that if you've watched Rochdale and if you've watched Gillingham, you'll know getting around them and make Charlie White cause problems for our central defenders, get some crosses into the box, and put us under pressure, and see how we do. And of late we've not been doing great at that. So that would be my but to your point, which is a valid one about hopefully the pressure being off a little bit.
So it's a question I always like asking, especially when we're on form. But we've touched on McGeady, we've touched on Charlie White, we've touched on those players that are probably the obvious ones that most opposition teams would worry about. But which players concern you outside of them from Sunderland's side?
It's a tough call. I mean, I know we've touched on him before, but Wyke is such an interesting one for me, and I'm interested to know what you think, because I visited the Stadium of Light, because obviously as a Lincoln fan, when you get the chance to play Sunderland away, it's obviously a huge draw. So me and my dad were very excited. We'd travelled up, had a chippy on the coast before the game, and you guys were in a not great form at the time. We went, and my dad didn't thank you for the climb up the stairs all the way to the top of that stand where the away fans. So I just put that on record for if we do ever manage to make it back as away fans to the Stadium of Light again, please can we sit somewhere else just for my dad? But we lost that game 3-1, and I don't know whether you watched it, but it was a strange old game where we basically gave you two goals. Jason Shackle ducking under a goal kick to let one of your players run straight through for a goal.
That's right.
But what interested me, and I was speaking to my friend who's a Sunderland fan afterwards, was that as an opposition fan, you always view these teams and you get one look at them. But I didn't rate Wyke at all. Didn't see it. Didn't rate him at all. I was saying afterwards, I was like, well, they're not a bad team, got a couple of good players, but what on earth are they doing with that guy up front? He looked slow, didn't seem to know what he was doing. But then, as I say, watching the trophy game, it was like a different player. It was absolutely unbelievable.
Huge difference.
And so that is the one. It's not that original, as you say.
But he's the one with 27-ish goals. I mean, it's kind of hard to pick anyone else, really. But
it's not that original, I'm afraid. But it is the one. But as I say, with some of the frailties we've got at the minute that we seem to have with balls into the box and with struggling to deal with strikers who have a bit of presence about them, if you like. He is the one that worries me with our defence at the minute, the way it is. Your fullback, forgive me, your right back.
Could be a few of them at the moment. Or Nyan's obviously.
Oh, Nyan, that's the one. He's impressed me the few times I've watched him.
He plays everywhere.
That's what I mean. I've seen him play in a couple of different positions. He's played in midfield a few times as well, hasn't he?
He was signed as a number 10 and he's currently playing centre half.
Really, one of these talented modern footballers. He's one of those that just looks like a talented player. Looks like he's got a lot of technical ability. So he's someone that I was impressed with rather than scared of, I would say. Mm-hmm. But that, as I say, the fear comes a little bit from Wyke at the minute, unfortunately. Not an original answer, I'm afraid, for your listeners. And there'll probably be a lot of people rolling their eyes and going, "Oh, here we go again."
Coming again and again, though, with the more the season's gone on, it's like if someone had said it to me in August, I probably would have questioned it. Nowadays, I kind of understand it. And every Sunderland fan listening to that will completely understand what you're saying about that game against Lincoln. We thought he was slow, ponderous, never going to get you 15 goals a season or 10 goals a season. I think there's many people jokingly said, I'll get a tattoo of Charlie Wyke if he gets 10 goals this season. And all these... He's on 30 and those tweets have been dug up. But, more power to him. I think I was speaking to, and this was a few years ago now, back when fans could go to games and everything. And I ended up bumping into former Sunderland player, Sheffield United, Matt Kilgallen. And it was at a Rangers game of all games in Glasgow. And I asked him, what are you doing here? And he said, I know a few of the boys playing and vice versa. And as did I. And he said, how's things at Sunderland? Because I think I'd interviewed him a few months previous. And he said, yeah, not too bad. He said, what do you think of Charlie Wyke? And I said, he's terrible. He's awful. He's horrendous. And he went, it's one of my best mates. I played with him at Bradford. He went, but it's confidence. He said, put confidence in him. Different player. And I thought, yeah, sure, mate. But he scored a couple of goals at the beginning of the season. Lee Johnson's come in and, hey, if it's confidence that's got him firing, then obviously there's a player in there with a a bit of confidence. So I can't knock anyone for saying Charlie White this season, which is something I didn't expect this time last year. But then again,
do you think he can play higher? Because obviously, let's talk in the negative here. If whether you go up or not, with the goals, if you don't go up, he's going to be the subject of rumours and links to all the clubs. As you say, you don't score that many goals in League One without getting some attention.
He must have something about him that I think could do it. I think on this season, obviously not as many, but he's different to maybe an Ivan Toney, who has all that athletic quality. He's very much kind of a big, strong League One striker, but he started at Middlesbrough. He's been linked again to Middlesbrough. His contract's up at the end of the season. I'm pretty confident he'll sign, if I'm completely honest. I can't see why he'd want to leave now when he's kind of got himself back on track. Good question. It's a good question. Once we get there, I'll let you know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've talked about League One as this such a difficult league. And I think that for a lot of the players as well, with some of our players as well, I talked about Jorge Grant earlier. I'd love to see, whether with us or with someone else, whether he could do it in the Championship. And it is such an interesting league. As you say, you talked about it then being a good striker in League One. That leap up to then prove yourself in the Championship. People talk about the leap from Championship to Premier League a lot, but I think that is as difficult. And it'd be really interesting to see whether he's into the Championship with you guys or with someone else, whether he'll be able to do it. Because as a striker as well, it's so difficult, isn't it? It's all down to serve it, particularly for him. As I say, I alluded to it before when I was watching us in the trophy game. If he's not getting the service, then he's not going to score goals, and then all of a sudden, people are judging him, slightly harshly, aren't they?
It's weird because Tranmere handled him quite well.
Really?
Of all the teams, and yet there's a lot of teams in League One over the past few weeks just haven't.
How did they do it? I'll text Michael Appleton before Saturday.
I think they were just rough with him. So I think if Lewis Monsma doesn't enjoy a battle, I think we've got that one tied down, thankfully.
Yeah, well, I worry. Hopefully Lewis Monsma's been watching maybe some war films or The Incredible Hulk before the match, just to kind of really G himself up.
Eating his spinach.
Yeah.
And finally, as always, question I've always done on these shows, and I've never got one prediction right yet. But what's your prediction for Saturday?
It's very difficult making predictions for Lincoln City because raised by going to games with my dad, who's one of the most pessimistic football fans you will ever meet.
Like my dad, then.
Yeah, like all dads, I think, of a generation.
Experience, I believe, is what they say.
That's what they say.
You think it's good now, son, but give it time. And I remember when blah, blah, blah. Yep. I know what kind of dad it is, yeah.
Exactly. So with that in mind and the form that we're in at the minute, I can't see anything other than a Sunderland win. But I do something about it. Hopefully a reaction to our current form, maybe. Something, and a faith in Michael Appleton suggests it'll be a tighter game. I can't see us making some of the mistakes that we've made. And as you say, as you hinted at, maybe the pressure will be off us slightly. A chance for the likes of Brennan Johnson and Morgan Rogers, these young academy guys to play on a nice big pitch, stadium alike, show what they can do. I think it'll be tight, but I'm going to go 2-1 Sunderland. Potentially with you guys taking the lead and maybe us coming back and making it a bit tight. But I'm going to go 2-1 Sunderland.
I was thinking 1-1 before we won tonight, but I'm just confident. So I'll stick with I'll go with 2-1, but I've never got one prediction right this season, so it's not going to be 2-1. But I'm going to say 2-1, just based on my form. It just won't be. But Tom, thanks so much for joining me, mate. Good crack. Hope you enjoyed yourself as well.
Absolutely, very much did, and good luck to you and all your listeners for the rest of the season. I think, as I say, from a journalistic point of view, I hope you guys do well, and you guys have had some difficult times. So, speaking professionally and not as a rival fan, I wish you all the best for the rest of the season.
Thank you very much, and hopefully it does come true that we do get out of this damn league this year. Tom, thanks very much, mate. Appreciate it.